Hello. I hope this finds you well. My current adventures have brought me north to some snowy Alaskan mountain tops. There's a bit of a storm outside, so I'm currently waiting it out. I decided now would be a perfect time to get back in touch with you. I know you can't really respond to me, but when I'm out gallivanting, explaining to you my methods makes me feel a little bit less lonely. So, here we are today. A project you might have seen in another recent video on this channel. We will be making Mr.Mister, otherwise known as SCP-4432. As you can see there, I've just made a basic shape for a body. Due to the nature of the way he's experimented on in my mind, I imagine him being very skinny, almost emaciated looking in appearance due to his heavily modified body and the crude theme of the experiments done on him. Now I'm starting to work on the different tools and toys that have been implemented into his body, starting with this old VCR television. I do remember my days. I do remember my days as a young boy when I'd finish watching a film on the VCR. See, I used to watch the same films over and over again, and I would be rewinding one back, and I remember I'd already seen the film and I'd see all the parts, and I went, oh, there's that part. There's the part where Mr. Bean gets arrested at the airport. I can't wait to get to that part when I'm watching through the movie again at regular speed. One other point I'd like to mention is, what is it with people? Some people, they look at you and they say, oh, I bet you don't know what this is. They have no idea how old you are, yet they assume that just because you look younger than them, you don't know what a VCR is. Ridiculous. Don't understand it. Get over yourself. Anyway, my apologies. Got a little bit heated there. Bring it back down. Cool off. Moving on. Because of that outburst, I barely get to talk about this next segment, where I designed a light bulb. Luckily, it was quite simple. I effectively just attached a cylinder to a sphere. And now I brought these two pieces back into ZBrush, where I decided to try and implement them into the body to get an idea of what that would look like. Because, I'm designing this from scratch, mostly just from my mind. So I kind of got to feel it out, There was something so satisfying about putting them in place. I know it's a little bit morbid, but it's satisfying making the scarred skin where it's been fused together, something like designing those parts. It's just something similar to designing the wrinkles on cloth. They have a very cathartic effect, in my opinion. Now I'm just refining the lips and the facial features more now that I've got the nose in place. There's no other facial features of his that have been adjusted, so I can kind of refine that. Make a scarf for the belly button, that will come in important later, and then a little bit more refining on different parts, really fleshing it out. So the more little wrinkles and irregularities, the better something tends to look when you're going for a bit more of a grotesque piece, such as this one. Sometimes I worry, working on pieces like this actually, that people will look at it and go, ooh, look at this artist, just trying to make something gross to get a shock value. That's not the point. That's not what always the idea behind the pieces. Anyway, here with the eye, as you can see, it took me a few tries to get the look I was going for. I decided to leave that in because even art, we have to trial and error is part of the process. We all go through it, so don't be ashamed when you're working on your own art pieces. Now, moving on. This is a little bit creative. In replacing his trachea is actually a candy dispenser, and I had to figure out how to show that. And it kind of doesn't make much sense because the trachea is not so much something on the outside, so I thought it would be kind of tough to visually represent, so I took some artistic liberties and made it look like the candy dispenser was actually the outside part of his throat, and you would turn the handle and then obviously the candy would come out. I feel like these kind of things, you don't see these kind of candy dispensers anymore. It's not so common, but there's something about it. The candy just tastes better when you get it after turning that crank and getting it to come out of that little machine. There's something about it. If you know what I'm saying. Anyway, here now, I pose the character up, and you might notice that obviously the electronical parts, the modifications are not moving with it, and it was a bit of an oversight on my part, placing them in before posing the model, but it's okay. It ended up not being too big of a deal to move those things into place the way I wanted them. And now that I've got him, after placing him, I can finally go all out with the small little wrinkles and details as we give his skin, make it look a little bit more realistic, add some texture, add some life, you know. Something about 3D art is, it's so easy for things to be a bit too smooth and perfect. There's so much more small, subtle texture on things in life that we never really seem to appreciate, but our smart human eyes and brains notice when those things are missing. A tragedy, really, you know. Nature has a cruel sense of humor. Anyway, enough of that. Sorry, I keep getting off topic. Allow me to continue to focus on the piece that we are working on here. Now, I brought it back into Blender. Luckily, I was smart to an extent, and I knew that some of the modifications would be easier to add after posing, including these USB cords and cables coming out of his belly button, and another cord, an Ethernet cable that comes out of his, where his genitals would be. I don't know how user-friendly it is, but I figured it wouldn't be. It's not terrible, it's just a cord. It was actually a surprisingly interesting challenge trying to model the head of the USB here. Luckily, I feel like USBs are something we strangely spent so much time looking at. I knew exactly what it would look like in my head. I barely even needed reference. Isn't that funny, eh? In our day and age, we spend so much time looking at the head of this cord, and it's immediately recognizable. Interesting. Very interesting, if you ask me. There was something oddly satisfying with this too, seeing all the wires dangling about. Just the effect it gave off, it was a little bit neat and cool. Now I'm doing a similar thing with the Ethernet cable. Believe it or not, I thought this would be quite tricky to model, but it turned out quite simple. I was quite happy with how easy it all came together, and I knew it wouldn't matter because it was going to be very hard to see anyway. Now, this character has Swiss Army-like fingers. They've been replaced with all kinds of tools and cutlery, in fact, as well. As you can see here, I'm modeling a spoon. Some of the shapes you'd see in a spoon were surprisingly hard to work with. Not so much as the fork, but believe it or not, it wasn't the shape that ended up being the hardest part, but the proportions. As you see as I zoom out here, it's comedically small. It took me a while to get it looking natural, I suppose. Unfortunately, I somehow lost the footage of me creating the knife, but as you can see now I'm creating a screwdriver to add some more variation to these different finger tools of his and make it seem a little bit more like a Swiss Army man type of vibe. Yes. Sorry. I thought I heard something outside. Anyways, I also, to finish off the set of tools for his fingers, I made some scissors. Yes, well, more so just the blades. I imagine that he doesn't need the handles due to the fact that they are part of his hands at the end of the day. I believe that's it for all the tools and trinkets, and actually for the modelling part itself. After this would move into more rendering and compositing. Oh wait, no, my bad. First, of course, we have to make it look like they're believably attached to his skin. My apologies. I cannot believe I made that mistake. But I'll leave it in. You know, you and me, we know each other better than that. We have a more personal relationship. I don't need to edit this out. Keep it going, as they say in the industry. Yes, I was just simply adding some scarring, making it look like his fingers were crudely removed and replaced with these horrific tools. And now I'm simply starting to build out the scene, texturing things and adding the base shape for the room he will eventually end up being in for the final shot. And a lot of these things ended up just being more so solid colors than materials, because the smaller things I wasn't too worried about. Look, and I knew, I actually haven't mentioned this yet, but in the final render I'm going to do compositing in Photoshop and make the image as a whole look far lower quality than the base image would look just after rendering. So all of these texturing, minute details would be much harder to notice anyway. Here, a little trick, I wanted to make it look like there was the wiring, the coil inside of the light bulb, but I knew it wasn't going to be close, but I just needed the idea of it really, so just use some simple cylinders and put an emission shader on them. Apparently his nose is supposed to glow red whenever a lie is told within, I believe, 5 meters of it. And I decided that that red glow would be a cool part of the lighting in the final composition. So, and once you see the final render, I believe that you will certainly agree with me. At this point, now I quickly projected the details from the high poly version onto a lower poly version of the model, so I would have an easier time working with it. And I rescaled the scene to make the lighting more accurate. It just makes it easier to understand, because the scale in Blender can play a big effect, play a big part in things. I quickly made the texture for the padded room in Substance Painter, and now I'm just doing some more of the detailed texturing in the shaders inside of Blender to break up some of the solid colors and make things a little bit more interesting to look at. And I knew that, again, like I said, the texturing, the detail wasn't going to be too big of a deal, so I didn't worry about doing a lot of it in Substance Painter. Just the node editor in Blender was sufficient. Now, as you can see, I do have a material on the floor and the walls, and I believe it looks quite nice. And the compositing, just some simple lens distortion and color correction. And now into Photoshop, where the real compositing happened, I did some more color correction, and then I added a noise onto a new layer to make it look more grainy, and to make it look like a lower quality photo. I actually blurred the noise to give it more of a mosaic look, similar to if you were taking a picture on a cellular phone, like an iPhone camera, the kind of picture you would get from that. And then I labeled it to, set up the scene, because it's supposed to be an SCP after all. Of course, they'd have it labeled, the picture, so you know what it is you're looking at. And that's everything. Once again, I'm, as always, eternally grateful that you stopped by to see me and spend this time with me. It means a lot for me on these long, cold, lonely nights, and I believe that's everything. Bye for now.